All right, welcome everyone to today's Google Search Central SEO Office Hours Hangout. My name is John Mueller. I'm a search advocate on the search relations team here at Google in Switzerland. And part of what we do are these office hour sessions where people can join in and ask their questions around their website and web search. We have a bunch of submissions on YouTube, so we can go through some of those, but maybe we can go through some of the live questions beforehand. Let's see. I think, David, you're on top of my list here.
Yes. Hi, John. I brought you two questions today. The first is, if I have a content project that is updated daily, for example, like the rates of cryptocurrency or something similar, what is the best way to do it? Is it to create a new article every day, so also a new URL? Or is it to update the existing article daily so the URL stays the same? What would you recommend?
I guess I would try to figure out if you're creating something new or if you're just updating something existing. Like if you have a page where you're just updating the prices, then you don't need to make a new page for every price change that you make. You just update those prices. On the other hand, if you're providing new information, then that feels like something that should live on a separate URL where people can go directly to that specific piece of information. The advantage also of keeping the same URL is that over time it builds a little bit more value, and then people understand, well, this is actually the place to go for this piece of information. So for example, if for every day for a new price you create a new page, then if people search for like what is the current price for this product, then they're going to find some of these, but it's going to be unclear to us which one of them they should show. On the other
Hmm.
hand, if you have one page where you just update the current price, then we know for the price, this is the page. So that's kind of how I would look at it there.
Okay, so when I would do it like this, would you recommend to force indexing also manually for this, or do you think it will get caught by Google over time?
It, I think it should get picked up automatically anyway.
Okay.
Usually, if you rely on using the submit to indexing in Search Console, to me, that's almost a sign that like Google isn't convinced about your website yet anyway. So even if you were
Right.
to force it into the index, then it's not a guarantee that it'll actually be shown in a visible place. So I think it's fine to use that in the beginning to kind of get started. And if you have really critical updates, to use it then. But for kind of the natural updates on a website, that shouldn't be something that you have to use.
Okay, but do you think it's necessary these one URL which is daily updated to also update the article date? Should be, should that be
Sure.
necessary?
I
Sure.
mean, if you're changing something significant on
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
page, yeah,
Yeah.
like why
Okay.
not? Yeah.
Okay. The second question I brought to you is we have like a service footer now where this footer shows up on every site on our website. And we have used H2 tags for the headings of this footer. So when I look at the hierarchy of headings now, for every they appear on every page like the H2 tags. Um, and my question is now, is it the best way to change these H2 tags to like normal paragraph things, or is there a way I can separate the footer, like for example with semantic HTML tags from the rest, so that I still be able to use the H2 tags for the footer, and they will not assigned to the main content by Google.
So where are you seeing the problem with the current setup?
That's when I look at like for every article we have, doesn't matter which topic is about. We also have the headings of this always the same service footer in the heading hierarchy.
And is it visible in the search results, or is it just like from a semantic point of view, it's in the hierarchy?
From a semantic point of view.
Okay, yeah. So
I thought maybe Google is now confused if these because these headings always appear on every page, or can they recognize it, and can Google separate it from the main content?
yeah, usually that should just work. Yeah.
Okay.
In HTML5, there's also an element that you can use for header and I think footer. And within those elements, you can like have your headings again, essentially. So even from a semantic point of view, you could set that up properly.
Okay.
That should be possible. I don't think it would cause any problems on Google's side either way.
But do you think, but because the service footer is above the regular footer, could I put both of these into one footer tag, or should I? Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So from our point of view, what usually happens with these kinds of common elements is we can recognize them across the site because they're more or less repeated across the site. And then we can try to de-emphasize them when it comes to search.
Okay.
Because we realize it's the same text on all of these pages. We will just pick one of these pages to rank essentially for the text in that footer section. It's not something that we would say is critical for the rest of the page.
Okay. But it would be cleaner to tidy it up and to separate it semantically.
Yeah, I think it would be cleaner. I don't think you would see any practical change. So that's always kind of the tricky part. From a theoretical point of view, you can make it cleaner, you can make it easier to understand, but from a practical SEO point of view, we're so used to these kind of footer elements and all of the weird ways that they're used. That's usually not a problem.
So it's more for my backlog, not for my to-do list today.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot. That was it from me.
Cool. Thanks. All right, Nirav.
John, so my first question is, Google Search Console is throwing an error, which is error in required structured data element. But when I check the same on validator.schema.org, it does not show any warnings or any errors. So first question is it the right site to check the EMP implementation of a web page? And if so, there is a contradiction. Like, what should be the step over here?
Yeah, so these testing tools are for slightly different purposes. That's probably why you're seeing that difference. The testing tool in schema.org is more about understanding schema.org markup in general, like overall, based on the requirements that schema.org has. And the testing tool in Search Console is focused purely on what we can pull out of the structured data and use to show in a search feature. So it's really focused on the search part of that story. And within search, we only use a small part of the schema.org markup. And sometimes we have slightly different requirements that maybe we require, I don't know, a specific element more than the base schema.org markup would require. And that's often why you see that difference. And like the schema.org validator is for the theoretical markup, and the Google validator is really for the practical Google search side of things.
So is there a way like we can check what exactly is missing over there? Because basically it's not an error, it's a warning on the Search Console. And when I check the details on the Search Console, it just says that you're not done it right. So will there be a possible way, or should my tech team figure it out?
Yeah, if it's a warning, then I wouldn't worry about it. It's basically just saying like you could have done something different. So at the first hand, I wouldn't worry about it. What I would do if you want to find out what exactly the difference is double check the documentation on developers.google.com for search. where we have all of the structured data documented and all of the required and recommended fields. And probably one of the recommended or optional fields is what is triggering this warning.
Sure. We'll do that.
Cool.
My second question is last week on somewhere close to 25th Feb, we did one experiment on our website wherein we improved the page speed of overall website. Like we moved from somewhere close to 30 and we are now at 45-50 according to the page speed insight score. And in the next couple of days, we saw a massive improvement in our ranks. So I just want to so can this be like this correlation? Does it if there is there a possibility that it is true, or there could be other external factors that can also be impacting, like so quick, like in just 2 days, and we are seeing a jump? That was I was just intrigued to ask this.
Yeah, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
Yeah, I think that would be due to something else,
Okay.
because the speed aspect is something that we have to pick up through the Chrome user experience report data, and that takes a while to collect and to be aggregated. And
Right.
that's not something that you would see within a couple of days. So my
Got
guess is something else that you did beforehand, you also did
Mhm.
well.
Right. Cool. Thanks, John.
Cool. All right, Hazel.
Hey, John.
Hi.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I've got two questions. The first one is about the sitemap. When Googlebot crawls the sitemap in the server address, does it firstly crawl these submitted sitemaps in the JSA backend, or it goes directly to our server address to crawl all sitemaps?
We don't crawl them all at the same time. So it's not that there's a specific order to them. It's more that for individual sitemap files, we try to figure out how often they change and how often they give us useful information. And based on that, for individual files, we will crawl them at different rates. So it can happen that one in your Search Console account is crawled very frequently, but also one that you submit directly is crawled frequently. And maybe another in Search Console is crawled very infrequently. So it doesn't depend on where you submit it. It really depends more on the sitemap file itself and what value it gives to us.
So even though one useless sitemap, we delete it in the JSA backend, the Googlebot still can crawl it in our server address.
Yeah. So especially when you delete a sitemap file from Search Console, we will still have it in our systems, and we will check it probably for, I don't know, I'm making a guess, like several months. We will probably try to recrawl that sitemap file just to make sure that it's not temporarily gone.
Yeah. So is there like any priority? Like maybe Googlebot will firstly crawl the submitted one, and then maybe crawl
No,
the.
not
No?
really. No. It's really about the individual sitemap files and kind of the value that our systems address to that sitemap file. And sometimes it's due to how frequently we see the sitemap file changing. Sometimes it's just due to other ways that kind of our systems try to understand the value of the content that is in the sitemap file.
Okay, I see. So one more question is about the crawling. Yeah, like what's the possible reason that maybe when certain pages didn't get indexed, even though they were like crawled multiple times?
It can happen. I would assume it's not that frequent, because usually when we decide to crawl something, we're also pretty happy to go off and index it. But it can happen that we crawl a page and then in the end decide, oh, well, actually, we don't need to index it. One common, I guess, like some common situations where that can happen, which perhaps don't apply in your case is if there's an error code on the page, we have to crawl it first, and then we see the error code. If there's a no index on the page, we also have to crawl it first, and then we see the no index. If the page is complete duplicate of something else that we've already seen, then we crawl it. We see it's a duplicate, but we focus on the primary page again. So those are kind of the normal situations where we would crawl something and not index it. But it can also happen that we crawl something, and then by the time we get to indexing, we decide, oh, well, actually, we want to get something else from the website instead.
So for this one get something else, does it have some like example factors? Like what other factors that may cause the Googlebot to like decide, oh, we don't want to index it at the end?
I don't know offhand. I think the overall website quality definitely plays a role there. But usually, if we're not convinced about the website quality, then we would probably not also crawl the page in the first place. So that's I think kind of a tricky situation. And if you look in Search Console, I think pretty much for every site, you will have the grouping of discovered but not indexed, and also crawled and not indexed. That's, I think, just pretty common across sites.
So the reason we ask this is we want to know, like, except page quality and some technical SEO factors like you just mentioned above, like some no index, meta tag, like something like. Other than that, is there any other factors that Alphagram may use to determine, that whether this page is worth of indexing or not?
I don't think we have anything specific otherwise documented. And I also think it's important to not over-focus on that specific page. So if you're sure that from a technical point of view everything goes OK, I wouldn't assume that the quality of that specific page is a problem, but rather kind of the perceived quality of that part of the website or the whole website itself. That's kind of the place where I would try to see like what you can do to improve things. Not just that individual page that didn't get indexed, but kind of like what is the bigger picture around that page.
OK, so like the overall site quality.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got you. Thanks.
Cool. All right. Akase.
Hi, John. Hi. I've got two questions. The first one is about our website not showing up for a branded keyword. So we've got two sites. One's a global site and one's an Australia site. And suddenly the Australia side was ranking for a branded term for on number one position for a good 2-3 months, and suddenly in the last 1 week it was replaced by the global website .com website for a couple of days, and I just wanted to understand why could that be the case.
It's hard to know without looking at the sites, but I mean, if these are two sites that are essentially part of the same bigger group, it can happen that we switch between kind of like which one we would show for ranking like that. With hreflang annotations, you can give us a little bit more information on how you want kind of like us to treat that pair of pages. So that can help a little bit. Geo-targeting can help a little bit. But even then, it can happen that we show a global version of a page in a country where you actually also have a local version of a page, perhaps just because the global version is so much stronger than the local version.
Okay, understood. And then there's another question about, so with the same website and the same global version and the Australia version, we're planning to take the same content that exists on a couple of pages on the global version onto the Australia website. And we're happy to add in a canonical to the global website. So just wanted to know, is that going to impact the Australia website's ranking in any way, or help it, or anything?
I mean, if you're moving the content, then at least for that content, like the site that has the content would be the one that would rank. But for the rest of the things there, I usually wouldn't expect bigger changes there. For example, if you're moving one product from one version of a website to another version, then the ranking for your company name, that's probably pretty detached from that single product. On the other hand, if that one product is the primary product that you're known for, then moving that over, that could have an effect. But assuming these are kind of like, it sounds like a kind of like random pages or random products from one website that you're taking to another one, I wouldn't expect that to affect your bigger picture ranking for those websites.
Right. Yeah, because these are just blog pages, and we're not moving it from one side to the other side. Instead, we're duplicating the same content, but obviously providing a canonical. So yeah, would that be okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, that's a perfect use of the canonical. If you have the same content on two different websites, telling us which one you want to have as a canonical is perfect use. And you don't have to do it the same way for all of the content on your site. So it can be that one website has these blog pages as canonical, the other website has different blog pages as canonical. That's perfectly fine.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Cool. Thanks. All right. Anton.
Yes, hey John. So we run an e-commerce website, and we are now in a stage where we want to make major updates to our category pages. And one draft wants, or like in one draft, we want to get rid of the product listings. So you have the product listings with the faceted search where you can filter for the project, for the products you are looking for. And my question is this: so when we remove the whole product listing of category pages, would we have a disadvantage in rankings? Because like first, all the other competitors like have these kind of product listings, and second, these like my guess is this is such an established element like for e-commerce pages that the users they expect something like this, like to have some kind of overview of all the products and the filters, like to search for the products they want.
I wouldn't see any problems there from an SEO point of view. I think there are different things you would want to watch out for, which probably you will, so that we can still find all of the individual products, that we have clean links there. But if you're just kind of redesigning this kind of a category page and making it look more like an informational page, I wouldn't expect any problems with that. I also don't think we do anything special with those kind of category pages in search anyway. So from that point of view, you're just changing the design, essentially. I think it would be different if it were a product page and you were to change it completely, because we do try to recognize product pages and figure out, oh, where's the price, where's the availability, those kind of things. And if you made it look completely differently, I don't know how, but if it were, then I could imagine that affects how we pick up the product pages and if we can show it in product search results or not. But the category pages, as far as I know, we don't do anything special with them. So if you hide them, essentially, and make sure that we can still find the links to the products, that's kind of an extreme case. You could do that. But if you want to make them more useful by providing more information on them, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I think one thing I would double check, though, because you mentioned, like, would users be confused? I would double check that separately. So from the SEO side of things, I think that's perfectly fine. But from the user side of things, it's probably something you'd want to test first.
Yeah. No, great advice. Thank you very much.
Cool. OK, maybe I'll just go through some of the submitted questions, and I'll get back to the folks who have their hands raised as well, and we have a bit more time afterwards as well. And it looks like there are not a ton of people here, so I'm sure we can get through most of the things. And it looks like I have your question on top, Anton, but hopefully that was a useful answer. Cool. All right. Next one I have is, if you have structured data for breadcrumb setup, is internal linking still important for SEO? And yes, absolutely. It's something where internal linking is super critical for SEO. I think it's one of the biggest things that you can do on a website to kind of guide Google and guide visitors to the pages that you think are important. And what you think is important is totally up to you. You can decide to make things important where you earn the most money, or you can make things important where you're the strongest competitor, or maybe you're the weakest competitor. With internal linking, you can really kind of focus things on those directions and those parts of your site. And that's not something that you can just replace with structured data. So just because there is structured data in a page somewhere, I wouldn't see that as a replacement for normal internal linking. Even if in the structured data you also provide URLs, we don't use those URLs in the same way as we would use normal internal links on a page. So it's definitely not the case that hreflang annotations replace kind of links between country versions, or breadcrumb annotations replace links between different levels of a website. You should really have normal HTML links between the different parts of your website. And ideally, you should not just have kind of like a basic set of links, but rather you should look at it in a strategic way and think about, what do you care about the most, and how can you highlight that with your internal link? All right, let's see. Next question is a long one about localization, or hreflang. And it starts off with, like, I have a quick question, and then it's long text about localization. We're localizing our website with a subdirectory structure. We have a TLD covering the MENA audience, but due to some reasons, we had to get another domain for a locale. How should I approach the localization here? Should I introduce an alternate tag for the other domain? As our global domain is currently ranking in that locale, we want the newer domain to appear there. So the example structured data or the hreflang annotations that you have there looks kind of OK. But one of the things I noticed there is you have xdefault set up on both of these sites separately. And from our point of view, we really need to just have one xdefault. So one way to look at this is, regardless of if it's on one domain or on multiple domains, on a per-page basis, all of the hreflang annotations should essentially match up. And it should be clear that for any particular page on this website, if we have kind of a requirement for what we would like to show users, the hreflang annotations guides us to one specific location. So for example, if someone is let's see, the languages you have here, Turkish in Turkey. If someone comes into your website like that, and we would rank one of these pages in the search results, it should be clear that from the cluster of hreflang annotations that you have, exactly which page would be the optimal one to show. So that's kind of the general guidance there. And it doesn't matter if it's all on one domain or across multiple domains. It should just be like one clear place per country and language. The other way around is a little bit more flexible, in that you can have multiple countries and languages on one page. So the mapping from country and language to a page should be kind of one-to-one. But the mapping of kind of per page, which countries are on that page or which languages on that page, that's up to you. And hreflang annotations look very simple at first, but it is very complicated to set up. So don't worry if it feels like, oh, this is something that you should just know. It is something that takes a lot of practice, and people struggle with these hreflang annotations. It's not always easy. Let's see. For product listing page, can we implement multiple product schemas on the product listing page? From our policy point of view, I don't think you should be doing that. At least the last time I checked the policy is around structured data, because for product structured data, we really want that to apply to the primary element of the page. And if you have multiple products on a page, it's not that one of them is the primary element of the page. So from that point of view, you should not use multiple product structured data elements on a kind of a category page or something like that. Is there best practice for pages with mixed language use? For example, our international school in Japan caters to Japanese and non-Japanese families. While we keep most of the information on our homepage in English, we add support on the page in Japanese as well. When we had the pages separate, it made the community's parents feel separate. Since our communication in real life is mixed language, having the homepage reflect that felt more natural. Are we punished in search if a page is intentionally mixed language? So I wouldn't necessarily say that a page is punished in a case like that. But we do try to understand what the primary language is of a page. And that helps us to understand for which kinds of queries we would be able to show this page. So that, I think, is kind of tricky in a case like this. We can understand when there are multiple languages on a page, too. It just makes it a lot easier for us to really be clear that if someone is searching in English, this is the right page to show to them. So I could imagine for something like a home page, maybe it makes sense to have that mix or a slight mix. Like if you have one home page as primary English, then maybe include some elements in Japanese. If you have another version that's primarily Japanese, some elements in English is fine. But it helps us to really understand that for the most part, this is an English page. And if someone is searching in English for a specific kind of international school in Japan, then it makes sense for us to say, well, here's an English piece of content that we know fits your needs and that matches the queries that you gave us. So from that point of view, I wouldn't necessarily say that the page is punished, but it makes it a lot harder for our systems to figure out how to rank that page properly. One of the things you can think about here, though, is look in Search Console what queries are going to your website or for your homepage, and think about which of these queries might be affected if Google didn't understand the language properly. And it could well be that if most people are searching for your name, for the brand of your school, essentially, then probably that would not be affected at all. On the other hand, if most people are searching for broader queries, more generic queries, kind of like, I don't know, almost like a sentence that would match something on your homepage, then I could imagine that would be a little bit harder for you to appear in search results for, just because we're not sure if your homepage is actually in that language of that query. So that's kind of my approach there. One thing you could also do if you're still kind of looking at options here is to make your homepage kind of this bilingual version that you're talking about there, but to create separate pages additionally for the individual languages, so that if someone is looking for long-form information about an international school like this, they can still find those kind of pure English or mostly English pages, and then from there transition to the rest of your website. So lots of different options to think about. I think it might be tempting to try to do something sneaky and maybe hide one version of the page and say, well, users can see it, but search engines can't. For the most part, I think you run into more technical issues when you do something like that than you actually get any value out of it. So that's one thing I would avoid doing. If there's a difference between content in the mobile and desktop version, does it mean that Google will punish the website and affect the website's ranking? Or does it simply mean that Googlebot can find it in the mobile version, but it won't be able to rank? So for the most part, we shifted most of our indexing to mobile-first indexing, which means we would only look at the mobile version of a website in a case like that. So essentially, if there's something that is slightly different on the desktop version of a website, we would, for the most part, not even use that for search. And so it's not that we would punish a website because of a difference, but rather it's like we just look at one version of the website, and we don't even know what is on the other version to kind of like treat it differently. And for the handful of sites that are still in desktop indexing, that applies the other way around, of course. If there's something on the desktop version that's not on the mobile version, or wait, something on the mobile version that's not on the desktop version, and you're being indexed by the desktop crawler, then we wouldn't really see that. We do crawl the alternate version from time to time, but we don't crawl it to pick up more information, but rather just to confirm that there's this connection between the desktop URL and the mobile URL. In my case, I have a hotel that shows microformats in a different language than the organic results. How can we make them show in the same language? It's hard to say without an example here. So if you, I don't know, if you're here in the Hangout, doesn't look like it. It would be really useful to kind of see what exactly you're seeing. It might be that the structured data on your page is actually in that language, and that's where we're picking it up from. I don't know where we would otherwise pick up things that we would show in the rich results. But it would be useful to take a look at an example like this. My niche is about poetry, and for years, leading poems topic in the search results. But in recent years, I found I compete with larger media sites, which is main websites that have nothing to do with poetry, like top 10 poetry keywords won by e-commerce sites, news sites, news websites. At the end of the day, specific niche website like mine will be gone, although I write about poetry for 7 years. Websites that are actually my rival for years, which is the same in my niche, one by one they disappear. I don't know what's happening here. Only large media sites are the winner, although if it's an article from an e-commerce site, I also see those e-commerce sites sometimes win on a health topic. So it's not only about e-commerce. Yeah, I honestly don't know exactly what kind of a website you have. And one of the things that I think is always a bit tricky is if your content is essentially commodity content, which sometimes is with some of these kind of poetry sites where you're publishing poems written by well-known authors, for example. And essentially, the content of your website is something that one-to-one anyone else could have because it's in public domain or whatever, then I think that's always kind of a tricky situation to be in. And it can be the case that for years, like, there are a few number of people who are doing this kind of content. But due to the nature of the content, where essentially anyone can take this poem and publish it on a website and maybe say, it's like, I have a T-shirt with this poem, so I have to put the poem in my description as well. These are things where it's almost like a little bit on unstable ground, where you can build something up, and maybe for a while you'll be the only one or one of few people who kind of creates a website like that. But in the long run, it's something where you need to make sure that you're providing something of significant value so that if someone else, especially a large player, comes into the area and also starts including poems in their content, then that you can kind of compete with them to some extent. And this is the case with, I think, a lot of content on the web that is almost like this commodity content. And that could be things like poems. It's like well-known sayings, all of these things where essentially the information is available and anyone can use it. And usually what I recommend when I see websites like this and they come to me with general questions is I recommend that they take the time where they're actually doing well in the search results and use that to build up and make something much larger that essentially provides something significant that other people can't just copy. Obviously, looking back, it's a lot easier to think, well, I should have done that. But it's still something, maybe you still have a chance to kind of like go out in that direction. But again, it's really hard to say without looking at your website. If you're essentially publishing your own poems and you're the only person publishing your own poems, then obviously that's a little bit different. But if you're publishing well-known poems by existing authors and anyone can publish those poems, then it's a tricky situation to be in. And sometimes it's worth just taking that and saying, well, I did really good for a while because I was one of the few people to do that. And now I have to find something different to focus on because I don't want to compete with these larger sites, for example. We have a food blog website. Our recipe posts are long form and straight to the point. I don't know, long form and straight to the point, and recipes, that sounds like a weird mixture, but fine. At the end of the post, we put an internal link for separate 20 FAQ posts about that recipe. And let's see, we include pro tips in the recipe itself, such that even if readers don't click the FAQ link, they can still make the recipe. The FAQ post is like an additional reading source for them. My question is our content strategy OK from an SEO point of view? With separate FAQ posts for each recipe, we are providing the best user experience by giving them additional information about how to make the recipe better, even if they have to click out of the original recipe to get that information. I think that's a perfectly fine strategy. So from Google's point of view, this is definitely not problematic. It's something where, especially with recipe content, I get a lot of complaints from people that like these are long recipes, and I don't have time to kind of like look at the life story and go through all of these other items on this page. I really just want the recipe. So if you can separate that out and focus on the recipe itself and maybe separate out some of the more, I don't know, the questions around that recipe, from a user point of view, that sounds like a great thing. It is something where I think the balance might be tricky with regards to how strong you make these individual pages. In particular, if you're kind of splitting things up on your website, maybe with regards to internal linking as well, that suddenly every recipe ends up being 2 pages, then of course we have to kind of index 2 pages per recipe, and we have to give kind of value to 2 pages per recipe, which means you're potentially diluting things a little bit. On the other hand, if you set it up in a way that maybe these FAQ pages are only linked from the recipe and the primary content on your website is the recipe itself, then I would expect that we'd be able to kind of focus on the recipe. And if someone searches for something that's within the FAQ part of that recipe, then we would be able to show the FAQ page in the search results. From a structured data point of view, from a rich results point of view, people sometimes like to put FAQ markup on all pages because it's like adds extra room in the search results. I think that's kind of almost like on the way out from our point of view, in that we've seen that people do this, and we do try to reduce the amount of FAQ entries that we show in the search results, just because it's not that useful for users, where every result has kind of this set of FAQs on it. So moving that out to a separate page, from my point of view, makes sense there too, in that you're not kind of like burdening the recipe result with all of this extra structured data. You're really kind of like, if people want more information, we have that information. If people just want to focus on the recipe, we have that information as well. Yeah, curious to see what kind of feedback we get about recipes. It's always one of those tricky topics. I have an e-commerce site with more than 4,500 URLs. I already submitted the proper sitemap of the site. I know that Google doesn't index everything, but Google is only indexing 86 URLs, essentially. So what can I do I think some of the things we've talked about before with regards to crawled and not indexed, they would apply here too. So the technical things I would double check, but also I would really give the overall quality of the website a review, and ideally do that also with people who are not directly involved with your website. So that's something where I think we have a blog post a while back about questions that you can ask yourself about your website. And I would try to find some people who are not associated with your website, give them some tasks to do on your website, and go through those questions with them. And try to get as objective feedback as possible to see what you can really do to significantly improve the quality of your website overall. And I realize with an e-commerce site, it's easy to just take a catalog of products and dump them on a website and then submit them, and suddenly you have 10,000 pages. But just because you can make a website with 10,000 pages or 4,500 here doesn't mean that you're providing something that is unique and valuable for the internet that we must have indexed and that we must show to people immediately. It's something where the kind of the value has to fit as well. OK, let's see. Maybe we'll switch back to some more live questions. And I also have a bit more time at the end. Should we run out of time? Let's see. Louis, I think you're up next.
Yes, that's correct. Hi, John. Hi, everybody. I have a question about the sitemaps. We have a really huge page with millions of URLs. And right now, we are currently, so the sitemaps are being currently renovated. And our IT team is considering storing the new files, also the new sitemap files, in our cloud service. That's mean from example.com/sitemaps to cloud.com sitemaps. And we are wondering, is that a problem? Or if we store the sitemaps in the cloud, and if that's not a problem, should we also create a permanent redirect for the old URL for this example.com sitemap, or how should we plan the move?
Yeah, so it's definitely possible to host a sitemap file somewhere else. There are two ways that you can do that. One is if you have both of those domains verified in Search Console. Then that works. The other way is if you submit it with the robots.txt file, where you specify sitemap : and then the URL of the sitemap. That can also go to a different domain. So that's something where if you have a separate server where you're creating sitemap files, or if you have kind of like a staging setup where it crawls and checks the files and then creates a sitemap file somewhere else, that would all work. I would also redirect the old sitemap file to the new location just to be clean. But probably even if you just delete the old sitemap URL and make sure to submit the new one properly, then that should just work. What might be a little bit tricky is I don't know how Search Console would show that directly in the UI. In particular, if the sitemap file is in a different location, if Search Console would show the sitemap information in the indexing report, for example. But that's a reporting problem. That's not something that kind of relies on the functionality of the sitemap file. It's really just Search Console doesn't show it properly. And again, maybe it does. I'm just not 100% sure.
OK, but we can survive with this problem. But with the main problem, that's mean it's not a problem if we have the sitemap also not in the main domain.
Yeah,
it's totally fine.
That's perfectly fine. In the beginning, when sitemaps first came out, there were some services that would crawl your website and create a sitemap file for you, and they did exactly that. And OK. That's perfectly valid setup.
OK, great. Thank you.
Cool. All right. And next up, I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm so sorry.
It's Gosia.
Gosia. OK.
All right. Hi. So I have a follow-up question on the answer that you gave us actually during the previous meeting. We posted question about domain with a history as an escort service provider. So you answered that what we need is patience and time. But I wanted to ask like some follow-up questions. So basically, the domain has a long history because the first snapshot of that website is from 1997. So it is a really long history where actually we relaunched our website in June last year. So it's very new and fresh. And the main issue that we are having is like, as in the message we stated that we still are getting flagged. And additionally, we have this issue that you already mentioned here today, crawled, currently not indexed. And we are trying to understand if the history of that domain can actually affect that we are having issues with indexing. And answering the questions from your blog, we do believe that the content we are publishing is a good quality, is internally linked, and we do build we try to build a quality site. Where we struggle at the moment is paid performance. So it's kind of in progress at the moment to optimize for that. But we use prerender.io. So kind of what we show for Google is already pre-rendered version. So when it comes to our Lighthouse score, it's all good. So if you could give us maybe some advice, like what can we improve or look for to understand like why are we not getting indexed? I'm happy to share the URL as well.
Yeah, if you can drop the URL into the chat, I can take a look at that and pass that on to the team probably. If you have a bit of time afterwards, after we have gone through the questions, I can double check maybe some first things as well. So kind of like to see if there's something super obvious that I can help with.
All right, that would be great.
Yeah, and usually the indexing side of things would not be related to kind of like if there was adult content on the website before. The indexing side might be affected if the content that was on there before was very spammy. So that might be something where kind of like from an indexing point of view, it just takes a while to figure out, oh, this new website is actually not spammy at all. But if it was just purely that there was adult content there before, then I could imagine that maybe our safe search filters are a little bit kind of slow in recognizing that. I do know we've taken some steps to make that faster, but maybe we need to make that even more faster. Or maybe there's something else on the safe search side that is kind of sticking. The safe search side is something that you can check if you do a site query and then turn safe search on and off. You should be able to see, is there something from safe search happening or not? You don't see that with regards to indexing, though. So, but I can take a look at this afterwards, and we can see if there's something like super obvious that I can let you know about.
That would be great. I'm going to stay on the call then. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Then we're up to Nirav.
Thanks, John, for. I just wanted to ask in the first place this. So I asked you about page speed. So does it even matter for SEO? Like I read in a document back in 2010 from Google's website that page speed is an important metric when it comes to SEO. So does it hold true in 2022 as well, or maybe it's not that?
It definitely matters. So I think one tricky part is we don't have this notion of page speed itself, but rather we kind of use the Core Web Vitals, which include different elements about user experience in them. So the page speed score, I think that's like a score from 0 to 100. I'm not sure if I'm mixing up the tools. Yeah. That's something that also takes into account a different number of kind of metrics on the speed of a website. And we don't use that exactly like that in the Core Web Vitals. And the Core Web Vitals we have documented fairly well. So some amount of speed goes into that too. And Core Web Vitals is definitely a ranking factor. We have that for mobile and desktop now. It is based on what users actually see. not
Right.
kind of a theoretical test of your pages. And for the most part, we focus on kind of the difference between something that is reasonably OK and something that is very slow. We have that in the different categories for the individual metrics, where I think we have good, medium, bad. I forgot what the names are. And usually, kind of when you come out of the bad section into the medium section, that's where we would say, oh, this website is improving and looking better. What you don't tend to see is big ranking changes overall for that. But rather, you would see changes for queries where we have similar content in the search results. So if someone is searching for your company name, we would not show some random blog just because it's a little bit faster instead of your homepage. We would show your homepage even if it's very slow. On the other hand, if someone is searching for, I don't know, running shoes, and there are lots of people writing about running shoes, then that's where kind of the speed aspect does play a bit more of a role. The other thing where speed plays in is when it comes to crawling itself, where especially for large websites, if a web server is very slow, then we can't crawl as much. And the amount of crawling that we can do is more around kind of like how much we can index. It's not a sign that we would rank that website lower than. So for very large websites, speed definitely also plays a role with regards to crawling.
Okay. So the Core Web Vitals, what I understand, is a subset of overall page speed, right? So these are like 4 or 5 important things that you should definitely focus. But there are other things. So now maybe we are at a stage wherein we have, we are into the green zone of that 4 or 5 things. So it should be like, hey, we are done, and let's not just get into over optimizing that thing. But still, there are certain things like Google is showing like, hey, this JavaScript is a bit lengthy, or your unused JavaScript, and you should also try to optimize. These are the suggestions that we are getting it. So although if we are green, and still it should be a good approach to follow these things, or no, maybe it's like now we are into over optimizing zone.
It sounds a little bit like you're into that zone where you're focusing on all of the small details that make like tiny differences. So that might be that, like you call it over optimization. That might be kind of in that direction. I think what I would do, though, is double check to see if there are any kind of user-facing effects that you can still work on. Like if you recognize, well, Core Web Vitals is green, so for SEO, we're good. But you see users jumping from your website because of maybe an interstitial or kind of bad accessibility on a website, then those are still issues that you can look at. But those would not be for SEO. They would just be for your website overall.
OK, got it. Thanks for allowing it again to ask. Thanks.
Cool. All right. We're pretty much at the end of its time. So I will pause the recording here. And like I mentioned, there's still a handful of hands up. We can go through your questions as well after the recording pauses. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for sticking around for so long until the end of the recording. If you'd like to join one of these in person in the future, we post them in the community section a few days ahead of the event. You can also add your questions there. And as always, thank you for joining here. Thank you for submitting so many questions. And hopefully, we'll see each other again in one of the future episodes. Thanks, everyone.